Now, Michael O'Hanlon, an American policy analyst, joins me now. He was director and is director of research and a senior fellow at the foreign policy program at the Brookings Institution. Mike O'Hanlon, it's great to have you on the Times at One. What do you believe Trump is trying to do with Zelensky in the next few hours? Is this all about maximum pressure now being put on the Ukrainian president?
Greetings. Nice to be with you. And that was an excellent report I thought you just did. And I concur with your analysis. I think that Trump is going to try to persuade Zelensky that there should be land swaps, or at least that's the only plausible, pragmatic path towards ending this war. As you know, Zelensky himself has understandably resisted even the talk of land swaps, not just Putin's crazy idea to be awarded more of the Donbas region than he currently has stolen. And so I think land swaps will be one big piece of the conversation. And also fleshing out a bit, what does it mean to have a U.S.-backed security guarantee for Ukraine? There are different ways to think about this. Some people have talked about Article 5-like provisions that are not done through NATO, but that requires Senate confirmation in our system, 2/3 vote. And I don't think we're anywhere near forming a treaty that would do that. You could also more pragmatically just have a lot of NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine doing various kinds of training and observation, and that could essentially become a tripwire, a de facto security guarantee. So these are the kind of issues that I think need to be discussed today.
Right. And today is pretty unprecedented because not only has Zelensky gone over there, but this posse of European leaders has joined him, and it seems they are deeply concerned about what they saw and heard coming out of that Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. You watched it very closely. What do you think changed as a result of that Trump-Putin meeting?
Well, first of all, I love your line, riding shotgun with Zelensky, which seems like a pretty good metaphor. But I think that, Alaska was dispiriting because of the warmth that Trump showed towards Putin. And, that has to make anybody who remembers what Putin's done to cause this war and continue it feel a little sick to their stomach. On the other hand, I don't think any other damage was done in a war that's already gone on 3.5 years. So we shouldn't blame Trump for the fact that, one meeting that was hopefully going to help deliver a ceasefire did not immediately do so. And I didn't see Trump make any big concessions. He put off the threat of sanctions, and that's concerning, but it doesn't have to be a permanent decision. And of course, Trump is famous for being tactically very flexible.
Yeah, just one question, a very crude question, if you like, about the sides here, because viewed from Europe, to many people, it basically seems like Trump is pretty much on Putin's side. I just wonder if that's a perception that is shared in Washington, and are there any sort of forces, influences in the Republican Party inside the Trump administration who might be trying to encourage the president to tread real carefully here?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think Trump's the only American who likes Putin. I haven't met any others. And I am not quite as worried as you suggest European leaders may be that Trump has somehow taken Putin's side, because over the last 6 months, what I've seen is a gradual toughening of Trump's terms for dealing with Russia and a growing realization that Russia caused this war and that Russia is the impediment to a ceasefire or a peace treaty. So unless somehow Putin bamboozled Trump even more than he has before, I think that Trump was just trying this sort of personal diplomacy, believing his own charisma and warmth could push things in a good direction. And we'll see. I mean, there's always the danger that all the toughening of Trump's position of the last few months will have evaporated in the late summer rays of Alaska's sun last week. But I'm more inclined to think that Trump is just tactfully trying the personal diplomacy, hoping that a little bit of sweet talk in both directions can get things going on the peace front.
Right. Mike O'Hanlon, it's a pleasure to have you on the Times at One. Thank you very much indeed. We've got the US perspective from Mike O'Hanlon. Let's now talk to Gideon Rakman, Chief Foreign Affairs Commentator of the Financial Times and author of the book, The Age of the Strongman, How the Cult of the Leader Threatens Democracy Around the World. Gideon, thank you so much for joining us in Times at One.
Pleasure.
Now, look, you watch Trump, you watch Putin. That's your job as a foreign affairs commentator. It seems to me Trump is now exactly where he wants to be, center stage, all of the leaders racing toward him. clearly signifying his centrality to what comes next. What do you think he wants to do with this role he's carved out for himself?
Well, I mean, you're right. I think, in a way, attention is almost an end in itself for Trump. But also, he does have this vision of himself as a great peacemaker. And he's almost childishly open about his desire to win the Nobel Peace Prize and so on. So I think in his mind, he wants to be the guy who brings Zelensky and Putin together to shake hands and have a warm embrace and settle it, and then afterwards both say, this could never have happened without Donald Trump. I don't think any of that is going to happen, but I think, that would be his ultimate vision of how this should end.
And to my question to Mike O'Hanlon about sides here, and I know it's crude, but what's your reading of the degree to which the Europeans fear Trump has basically decided Putin has to be given the win?
I think that they think that's a danger, but they do not accept that it's an inevitability. And that's why you've got all these European leaders rushing over there to deal with him. And I think they've developed a playbook, really, since that disastrous meeting between Zelensky and Trump, the last time the two met in the White House in February. And that playbook is never contradict Trump, always play along with him, always talk up the positive. Nobody's going to say what you did in Alaska was a disgrace, even if they privately think that. They're going to say, wonderful, now let's build on it. And what these Europeans say is, take Trump's big statement and then fill in the detail for him in a way we like, which is sort of what Putin was trying to do.
Right, but there is that phrase, and it involves a word I can't use on air, but sometimes the you-know-what gets real. And right now it is getting real. I mean, there's only so much that sort of very sophisticated diplomacy and flattery can achieve when actually the problem at hand is urgent, it's intractable,
sure.
And Donald Trump doesn't seem to recognize it in the same way as the Europeans. At some point, they are going to have to either break with him or deliver him some very tough messaging, aren't they?
I think maybe, but I think they're going to try to avoid doing either of those things because they think tough messaging is counterproductive because it just pisses him off. And they certainly don't want to break with him because the sad reality is that both Europe and Ukraine are dependent on the Americans. I mean, they would love in some sort of emotional way to be able to tell him to get lost, but actually Ukraine to fight on needs American intelligence support above all for the targeting, the drones, all of that. And Europe, they're hoping to become more less dependent on the United States in security terms over the next decade, but it's going to take a decade, which is why people like Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, is almost sort of embarrassingly obsequious towards Trump.
Yeah, well, you just were less cautious with your language than me, so apologies to anybody who might have been offended by that, although I can't imagine there were many. But just on that question of the Europeans, one sort of underlying theme here is the degree to which Europe could continue to sustain Ukraine's defiant struggle against Putin if America, Trump, completely walked away. Mm-hmm. How credible is it to imagine that would happen?
I think it'd be I think there's always the danger that they'll walk away, and they threatened that, and there was that brief period when they cut off intelligence sharing. If that were to happen, I think Europe could sustain a lot, but not everything, because there are two particular things. There's the intelligence sharing and there's air defenses, which, obviously Russia has been hammering Ukraine with glide bombs, with drones manufactured by Iran and so on. And the air defenses largely are produced by the United States. So those two things are really, really important. The money is also important, but Europe is now the larger funder than the United States. So it's that kind of stuff. There may be a fudge, though, whereby the Europeans buy some of the weaponry from the United States and hand it over to the Ukrainians.
The choreography is going to be really interesting over the next few hours. When we get to the end of this, when Zelensky's had his session, when the Europeans have weighed in, where do you think we'll be? I mean, some people talk as though they think peace may be at hand, but how does this unfold in your view?
Well, I mean, one of the people closely involved in this diplomacy said to me there are a lot of moving parts, and it is possible that we will now get towards something that begins to end the war, which would be great. I mean, in that sense, I kind of agree with Trump. It's a tragic war. A lot of people are dying. If we could stop it, great. Obviously, the terms are what matters. I think I'm personally skeptical. I just think Putin wants to keep fighting and will keep fighting. If there's a deal to be had, it will revolve around the trade-off between territory, which you discussed, and security guarantees. It's incredibly hard for Zelensky to give up any territory, but he might be prepared to freeze the lines where they are now, not give up anything more, and not accept that Russia legally occupies that territory, but it's what they call the distinction between de facto and de jure Russian occupation. But even that, I think he would only do in return for a cast iron security guarantee. And then I think the question would be a very interesting one for Britain, because you get to the question of, well, what do we mean by this security guarantee? Are we going to put troops into Ukraine? And are we going to say, if the Russians cross a line, we'll fight them and we'll be at war with Russia?
And what's your answer to that?
I would be surprised if we did that. But it's interesting. You talk to the military people. They say, if you don't say that, you're setting yourself up for failure. So you really have to do that. But I think it might be quite hard. Micah Hanlon was talking about the difficulty of getting that through Congress. I think it'd be quite a debate in Parliament.
But as you've just indicated, without that ultimate resolve, this all falls apart.
Or it just goes on and on. I think that we've had lots of moments where we think this is reaching a crisis. We felt that after Zelensky's meeting with Trump in February. We may have felt it after the Anchorage summit, but actually it's kind of an ongoing melodrama. It's a soap opera where I don't mean to belittle it, because obviously there's a tragedy going on in the war. There are a lot of people being killed, civilians and soldiers. But there are these moments, partly because Trump is such a sort of master melodrama, where you think, my goodness, this is, unsustainable. It's going to end one way or another. But actually, it's just the prelude to the next episode.